Often we come to the sexuality, we don't think about it in terms of discipleship. A lot of times when we think about discipleship, we think about scripture reading, we think about prayer, we think about those traditional ways to grow as a Christian. We had a men's breakfast this past Saturday, a week ago Saturday, and we talked about spiritual disciplines. And a lot of, as we're going around the table, a lot of things that were mentioned were those traditional spiritual disciplines. And so, how are you doing in your quiet time? Are you spending time reading scripture? And those are all good things. But what I like about this series, Everyday Discipleship, is that we have to bring the lordship of Christ into every aspect of our lives, and that includes who we are as sexual beings. And so real life discipleship means we cannot divorce our sexuality from the rest of our life in Christ. Or often we have, again, I'm a good Christian, I do this, I show up on Sunday morning, I read my Bible, I pray, I do all that stuff, and my sexuality is somewhere else over here, and it's not integrated. And so for me, part of real life discipleship is integrating these two, that again, we can't keep these separate. So that's part of my hope over this month is to help bring some integration there. And so part of my contention is that what makes sexual discipleship particularly hard is that few of us were provided with intentional sexual formation. That, again, we may even talk about finances. I know you're talking about careers coming up. And those are things that, generally speaking, they're external sources that they can apply to that. And then it's, okay, how do I bring that under the lordship of Christ? But there are teachings about money in the, for lack of a better phrase, secular world. There's teaching about careers, again, in the secular world. When it comes to sexuality, while there's teaching, there's not really intentional teaching. It's kind of whatever makes you happy. So there's not really intentional, here's how to grow, and here's what it means to be a healthy sexual being. Or even in culture, it's reduced to maybe our sexual identity, and so how we identify publicly, or again, what makes you happy in the bedroom. And there will be aspects of our sexual self, but not the fullness of who our sexual self. And so what does it mean to actually be a sexual being, and who is answering that question? And often, again, there's a lack there. And so this is what I would then say is most of us have experienced degrees of sexual neglect, which is the absence of direct instruction, training, or guidance in the sexual part of our life. And so we understand the harm of sexual abuse, that if we are abused sexually, that will disrupt, distort, bring trauma to my sense of sexual self. But I would argue that sexual neglect could do that as well. The path of healing journey is different, but I would say sexual neglect can have that same sense of disruption in the growth of who we are. This is somewhat easier to see when we talk about child abuse or child neglect, that we understand child abuse will harm the child. We also understand that if you neglect that child and not give that child basic needs, that child will have a failure to thrive. I think that's true here as well. But a lot of times we experience a failure to thrive in our sexuality because we've been neglected sexually. Like, no one has given us direct instruction, training, guidance in the sexual part of our life. We've just been, okay, well, figure it out. Like, just here's some bad things to avoid, but for the rest of it, just kind of figure it out.
Corey,
please.
And I think it's, at least when I was growing up, I don't know how it is now, but it was almost worse than that, right? Because the instruction or training, a lot of that came from peers.
Yeah.
And there was this concept that you are lesser of a woman or lesser of a male, if you had not hit these certain experience milestones by a certain age,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you had not had intercourse, weren't in a physical relationship with somebody by a certain time, well, man, what's wrong with you, man?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or, hey, come on, man,
Yeah.
you need to be a man, and it was very, very unhealthy, right? And then, you go into the media, and there's lots of examples of unhealthy, but unfortunately, that's the only instruction a lot of people get.
Right. And I'll make the argument that sexual formation is not neutral. We're going to be formed one way or another. And so if we're not provided with direct, intentional instruction, teaching, guidance, then we're left with our peers. We're left with media. We're left with porn. We're left with all these things that are still forming our sexual selves, but it's not with any intention of, all right, here's who you should become. And so we're left with, again, all right, you're not a real man unless you've done this, that, and the other. We're left with porn being our teacher. We're left with silence being our teacher. And those are not the best teachers in this area, particularly when it comes to sexual discipleship.
Corey, is that term sexual formation unique to you, or is that a term that, like, I've never heard it phrased that way? I think that's so helpful as I think about spiritual formation. Like our small group, we talk about that as like really the heartbeat of what it's about. That's really that's helpful language to apply to that. I've just not heard it said that way before.
Yeah, it's a new term that I'm working through. And so when I Googled it to see, all right, who else is using this term, it was popped up, but as far as in the literature, there's not a lot who use it in that way. There is a book on sexual discipleship, but I don't know if she uses sexual formation per se. But I like that concept of, again, it's forming who you are.
It's super helpful.
And so what are the aspects of sexual formation? Part of it is having a vision. And so why did God create sexuality? And this will be the buck of our time this morning, is unpacking that. It also goes into discipline, the practice of right living. In some of our later series, we will talk about just sexual stewardship, and now we'll get into some of the discipline aspects. And so how do we practice right living as it relates to our sexuality? And I debated with the celebration aspect of it, because some of it, as I was thinking it through, is like that should come natural. Like if we have a vision for why God created sexuality, then it should naturally spark celebration. If we're disciplining ourselves, not just to avoid the bad, but also to pursue the good, then won't celebration be a natural byproduct of that? But I think it's helpful to name it as a separate aspect to focus on, where I have a lot of clients come in and their sexuality is a burden. It is a thing they have to wrestle with, and it's not a point of delight. It's not a point of rejoicing. And so they have both with their bodies and their sexuality as a whole, just this almost disdain for it, with trying to, how do I manage it? How do I keep it under control? How do I tame it? And some of that is good, but it never gets to this point of actually, how do you celebrate the gift that God has given you? And so I think part of sexual formation, to become fully who God has created us to be as sexual beings, includes celebrating what He's given us as well. Why did God create sexuality? What is your thinking? So whether that is you personally, or how you think your friend would answer, or a good Christian would answer it, or the world would answer it, how do you think people would answer this question of why did God create sexuality?
I think, unfortunately, a lot of Christians might not have an answer to that because it's segmented off, right? It's like this thing that sexuality is kind of this bad thing over here, and because it is the way sexuality is often, I think, it has been talked about in the church, in like the purity movement of things, and the way it's been talked about has been, it's very much bad, right. Stay away, evil. Then you get married, and then boom, oh, flip switch, now it's good, now it's fine. Yeah. And it's like, how do you grow up with that lens? What kind of shame does that create in marriage? Of like, and for a lot of my life, I did grow up with that. But it's like, oh, sexuality, I'm a single guy, I'm not married, I have no way to exercise that, so it's all just pure evil.
Right.
It's bad,
right.
Stay away,
Yeah.
flee. And so I think like sometimes for some Christian contexts, we may not have an answer for that because like sexuality, God created it. Like I thought that was the devil that created that.
Right. Exactly, and that's intentional way that I asked the question, why did God create sexuality? Because you're right, we often don't think of God creating sexuality. This is something that we have to deal with, we're burdened with it, but we don't ever think about, okay, why did God create it? And then when we get to sexuality, we often think about the sex act itself. And so again, if I'm single and I'm following Christian ethics, and that's not for me, and so this is something I have to work against. Part of what I'm going to suggest this morning is that our sexuality is not reduced to sex. So sex is a part of sexuality, but sexuality is not just about sex. And so you have a big box and then the smaller boxes. And so I'll put true sex in the small box. And so when we think about genital expressions, that's what I would say is true sex, including intercourse, but I'll put all genital expressions here in this aspect of true sex. Erotic behaviors, things that may be arousing, but not including the direct access to the genitals. But in comparison, sexuality is much broader than that. So sexuality for me is about who we are as males and females. And so we all engage in this dance of sexes. And so I'm a male, and I'm going to engage with you as a male or female, respectively. So if I was a female, then you would interact with me differently. And again, I will interact with you depending on your gender. And it's one of those things that we don't consciously think about. It just is. I want to interact with you based on your gender. So this is what I would call social sexuality, this dance of the sexes. This is where we get relationships like mom and dad, brother and sister, aunt, uncles. All those are gender relationships, and there's a different flavor in my relationship with my mom than my relationship with my dad based on their gender. They're both parents, but there's a different energy in those relationships. There's a different energy if I had a sister with my sister than with my brother, because again, they're different genders, and so again, it just flavors differently. So that's what I would call the dance of the sexes. And so our sexuality in a broad box, we want to spend most of our time up here. That even once you're dating, even once you get married and access to true sex, again, that's still going to occupy a very small amount of the time that you spend in the rest of your life. The rest of your life you're going to spend here. Please.
Corey, are you going to get into any of, when we think of the, I guess, traditional stereotypes, right, and I'm speaking specifically in the healthy ones, healthy stereotypes of maleness or femaleness, right? That's real easy, right? But, and especially right now, it's kind of mainstream, it's kind of headline stuff, it's kind of where the line gets blurry, right? You have a more effeminate male who may be struggling with his identity, right? Society's saying, well, that means you're one thing, and they're wrestling through that. You may have a more, we used to call them tomboys, or more male feeling female, and so you got both ends of the spectrum, and then you got where it starts to get maybe a little bit closer. Are you going to speak to it?
We're going to get to gender, so we may get to some of that. So for me, the heart of sexuality speaks to who we are as males and females. So this shapes our social relationships as we take gender with us everywhere we go, as I was just mentioning. And so sexuality is about who we are as males and females. Now we're back to this question, why did God create our sexuality? Why did God create males and females? And most of you know the answer to this question, though you probably not have put the connection together. Because we're all good Bible students. We know Genesis 1. So then, let us make man in our image. And so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. Why did God create male and female? God created male and female because he wanted beings in his own image. Okay? And so what is sexuality? If sexuality is about who we are as males and females, the text tells us that God created males and females to have beings in his own image. Is it fair then to say that our sexuality is God reflective? That something about our sexuality is to point back to the Creator. And so we can start with the attributes of God and learn something about our sexuality. Or we can start with our sexuality and learn something about God. And so if God is a creative God, then something about our sexuality should also be creative. If God is an intimate God, then something about our sexuality should also be intimate. If God is a passionate God, then something about our sexuality should also be passionate. If God is a playful, then something about our sexuality should also be playful. And so whatever those attributes of God are, somehow that should be reflected in our sexuality. But it goes the opposite direction as well, that we can learn about God from our sexuality. And so we can read about the passions of God saving his people with his powerful right arm. And because I know masculinity, I'm going to know what that image of masculinity looks like. I have a better picture of who God is. I will satisfy you like a baby at his mother's breast. And so because I know that picture of femininity, again, I have a greater picture of who God is. And so I can start at either point, learn the attributes of God, and learn about something about my sexuality, or I can start at my sexuality, contemplate on that, and learn something about God, because God created our sexuality. He created us as males and females to reflect who he is. He wanted beings in his image. So the next question becomes how to reflect God's image as males and females. So if it's true that our sexuality is to reflect God, we get to do that as males and females, what is it about the male image that reflects God? What is it about the female image that reflects God? Now, I would argue that God is an infinite God. And so we can spend a lifetime contemplating on these things and probably still just scratch the surface. This is my take. I'm sure it can be developed even more. In general, I would say Adam gets to provide a divine reflection of strength. And the male body tells the story. Where the male body, generally speaking, is physically stronger than the average female body. Again, there's exceptions there, as you were talking. There's exceptions there, but generally speaking, the male body is stronger than the average female body. We're talking about sexuality, so we're dropping down to the genital level. Males have a penis that grows strong and erect, kind of like a rock or a hard tower. And again, God is showing us something here. The very way that the male body is designed, God is showing us something. He's telling a story. You all are all adults in here, so again, I'm making an assumption that you know how babies are made. This may be a review.
This is revelation.
You talk to Corey afterwards.
Talk to Corey.
We don't have to that yet.
Yes, we don't have any diagrams, but if you need help, yes, we can do that. The male has his part to play, and the female has her part to play. And so for conception to take place, the male has to rise to the occasion. He has to offer his strength. He has to spill his seed in order for conception to take place. And again, yes, while scientifically we can talk about technical aspects of baby making, what is the story that God is telling through our very bodies? That Adam, you have a strength. In order for you to bring life into the world, you need to rise to the occasion. You need to offer your strength. You need to spill yourself in order for their life to be in the world. And so whether that's literal baby making or anywhere we see a sense of barrenness in the world, again, Adam, you're called to bring your strength into that situation to bring more life. And so our strength brings life and goodness to others. In the presence of a mature man, then one feels safe and secure in his presence. Please.
You know, something that was just brought to mind as you study, it's interesting that you showed that circle before about how, we can learn about God through our sexuality and vice versa, right? And you think about a lot of the primitive cultures.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's very common in there is, they have images and idols that look like a male penis.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to that, the strength piece of that.
Yeah.
And I just,
A couple months ago, I gave a talk in an auditorium class on Romans, how creation reveals the Creator, and so that we're without excuse. And so it's one of those things that even in, like you're saying, primitive cultures, there's not an excuse for not knowing God because He's put it in our very bodies. And so you don't have to get a PhD, you don't have to find the popular trends of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. You just have to go to your very body because God has imprinted that story in your very body. And so sometimes when we think about, okay, what does it mean to be a man? It's like, again, you don't have to follow what's popular. What is your body telling you? And that gives you a clue. Even with that, there's a lot of variation in the body. And so not everyone is bodybuilders. But even if you're not a bodybuilder, your body is still telling you something on some level. That, again, whether you're a big guy or a small guy, you still have a penis that does what it does. And so there's aspects that, some aspect of masculinity is still imprinted in your body, even if you're not the stereotypical manly man in a social sense. For Eve, I would say Eve gets to reflect God in beauty. As we're saying with Adam, that's not just physical beauty. And so even though it's displayed physically, it's just not about, physical strength. It's not just physical strength. And so same with Eve, as we're talking about beauty, it's just not about her physical beauty. But her body tells a story. And so for me, beauty invites, it comforts, and inspires. It tells us all will be well. So there's a reason that when a loved one dies, you get them flowers. Because I don't have words for you right now, but here's beauty. Here's something that speaks to a transcend that I can't explain it. I can't use words. There's nothing I can say, but here's beauty. And femininity is a representation of that beauty, that just being in the presence. There's stories about soldiers in war who just wants a nurse to sit with them. Not to do anything in particular, but just her presence there brings calms to them. And again, the female body tells the story. And so she has breasts that's able to nourish life. She has a womb that's able to nourish life. Again, getting back to the genital level, she has a vulva that's able to grow wet and inviting, kind of like a garden or a flowing fountain that Solomon references. And so again, God is telling us something. In order for conception to take place, there has to be some level of invitation, some level of receptivity in order for conception to take place. We can even see this down at a cellular level, that the egg has to receive the sperm into it. That if the egg doesn't receive the sperm, then again, no life takes place. And so there's something about femininity that is this inviting, comforting, nourishing aspect. Again, there's degrees of that as far as how we express that, but something about femininity is to reflect this beauty. And others feel noticed and special in her presence. And so we're talking about genitals and even baby making. I want you to get that this is not about the sex act itself, that this is getting to the heart of it. And so both for masculinity and femininity, the phrase I use is being soul sexy. So it's using your body, soul, and spirit to bring the fullness of your masculinity or your femininity to that situation. And so to be soul sexy is to confidently show up as a man or woman in body, soul, and spirit, so the entirety of your being. So it's not just the physical, but it includes the physical. Your soul, sometimes we say soul as our inward self. Sometimes we say soul as the entirety of our being. I don't use it both. Soul sexy will be the entirety of your being. To generate more life and goodness into your relationships and the world. And so there's a part of sexuality that is generative. And so our genitals, again, those same root words, to generate. How do we generate more life and goodness? We're generating more life and goodness through our masculinity, through our femininity, through that dance of the sexes. We're bringing more life and goodness into the world. And so this is back to that big box of social sexuality. And so in that big box of social sexuality, this is where we as soul sexy men and women have the opportunity to use our gender to protect, nurture, and build each other up as brothers and sisters in Christ. Where the easy example for me, there's a colleague. She is probably in her 70s. But every so often she needs something moved around the office. So the latest was some chairs that she was taking home. Once it was a pretty healthy size printer, but she would ask me to move that printer. And then I would go and move forward, and she's like, "Oh, you're so strong, and so thank you for all your help." And it felt good. So you're using her femininity to affirm my masculinity. I was able to use my strength to help her in that way, and it felt good on both sides. So I got to be, in a sense, a son to her, and she got to be a mother to me in that moment. In some ways, it's easier to see that in a parent-child sort of dynamic, but that's the spirit of what we're trying to see even in a brother-sister dynamic. That I can affirm your gender, I can call something out in you as a brother or sister in Christ that doesn't have to have sexual overtones, but it's still unique to your masculinity, unique to your femininity. And that will be some of the challenge for you going forward, is how do I learn how to do that? How do I learn how to engage in this dance of sexes that I can use my masculinity or my femininity to bring out something good in you? And I'm underlining "and" because sometimes we put this more, all right, the guys would encourage the guys and the women would encourage the women, and certainly there's a place for that. And so iron sharpens iron. And so there's a place for guys just to hang out with other guys, and particularly when you're dealing with sensitive topics, it is helpful to have some of that segregation. But I think part of God's family is to be a family, and we need both our brothers and sisters. And so I can hang out with guys all day long, but there's something that my sisters are going to offer me that guys just simply can't offer me. I had a good friend who went through a divorce many years ago, and he liked the Broadway plays type things. And so Lion King was the one that I think of in this example, that he wanted to go see Lion King, but he's divorced now. It's like, it doesn't seem right to take my guy friends to go see Lion King with. So he wanted female companionship to go with, but again, he's recently divorced. He's not looking to date. He's not looking to pursue a relationship. But it's like, this is where I just need a sister to go with, because there's something about going there that I enjoy. But this is a situation in which female company seems better than masculine company. There's a place for masculine company, but here's a place for female company as well. I think we need both. So I'm gonna wrap with just the rule of life, and then we can open the floor to any dialogue or questions that might come. When I say rule of life, this is not like a hard, fast, perfectionist sort of thing that I have to do these things. Think of it more in the sense of practice. And so here are things that I'm going to choose to practice as it relates to my sexuality. And so I will study the attributes of God. I consider how they're reflected in my sexuality. So that's a good starting point of, all right, again, because we're good Bible students, let's just start with what we already know. Here are the attributes of God. How might that be reflected in my sexuality? We're trying to bridge that gap of, all right, I study all these things of God, but that's disconnected from my sexuality. You know, all those things that you've been studying about God for years, again, how you've learned God, somehow that's reflected in your sexuality. Start to make those connections. Certainly, if you want to do the reverse as well of just contemplating on your sexuality, I get paid to do this, and so it's part of my job is to spend hours being able to think on these things. But that may not be a bad starting point for you as well. Of, all right, what can I learn about God through my sexuality? So that's not. If you want to reverse it, one, you can do that as well. Two, I will pray and thank God for the body He's given me. Again, I've seen a lot of clients where they have a disrespect to their body, they dismiss their body, and then they continue to struggle with certain things in the sexual arena, in large part because they're not at home in their own bodies. So yes, there's a place to steward our bodies and make sure that our bodies are healthy, and all of that is just not settling. By all means, be a wise steward of your body, but how do you pray and thank God for the body that He's given you so that you bless your body and not curse your body? And then finally, it's that commitment to be soul sexy. And so in your dance of the sexes, as you show up as a soul sexy man, or you show up as a soul sexy woman in this dance of the sexes. I guess distinction between stereotypes and archetypes. And so part of what I'm trying to present here is the archetype of masculinity, the archetype of femininity. And often those stereotypes have some loose association with those archetypes, but then become caricatures of that, or limited to a particular culture or generation. And so the stereotypes are not altogether wrong, but they're not necessarily biblical in that you have to meet this stereotype in order to reflect masculinity or reflect femininity. So as you're saying, things are going to change even 100 years from now of what does socially it looks like to be a man or socially it looks like to be a woman. But again, the body's going to be the same. So since the beginning of time, again, the basic anatomy of the male has remained the same. The basic anatomy of the female is going to remain the same. And if Christ doesn't come 100 years from now, again, the basic anatomy is still going to be the same. So there's some aspect that is enduring, even though how we show up in each culture, each generation is going to be different. And so if you find yourself in a culture that, okay, what is socially acceptable or norm for masculinity and femininity, I don't fit that, that's fine. What is that archetype of masculinity, that archetype of femininity that you can still find your home in?
Do you feel like a lot of these stereotypes really become caricatures, right? Where they're exaggerating certain aspects of an archetype, right? Yeah. And then those caricatures get associated with category. So if you find yourself relating to this caricature of, big jacked up male, right? Well, then you're in this bucket.
Right.
If you find yourself relating to the caricature of liking show tunes, going to plays, well, then you're part of this group over here, right? And
we become very simplistic because we like categories, and that's part of the human mind is just to put things in nice, neat categories. But then human life is much more complex and messy than that. And so that's what I like about the archetypes is that it doesn't put you in this small box. It's like, no, there's a lot of variation of what it means to be a man. There's a lot of variation on what it looks like to be a woman, but there's still this structure, there's still this pattern that's there at the same time. Yep. Good.